Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson. The use of the mentative instruments. In the use of the eyes for the purpose of conveying mentative currents, you should always remember that the feeling is the real power behind these currents of force, and that the brain is the dynamo from which the currents originate. The brain, you know, is the great transformer or converter of the mentative energy, and acts just as does a dynamo in the direction of sending forth great waves of force. Consequently, if you wish to send out mentative currents for the purpose of inducing feeling in others, you must first have feeling generated in your mental dynamo. Valuable exercises. It will be well for two people to practice the eye exercises together, but in the absence of a friend in whom you have confidence, you may obtain excellent results by practicing before your friendly mirror. In either case, you must first arouse in your mind the feeling that you wish to express in mentative currents. Put your feeling into your glance and it will be felt. Exercise 1. Look into the eyes of your friend, or your own in the mirror, and then say mentally, "I am stronger than you." Throw into your glance as much of the feeling of strength as you can. Exercise 2. Say mentally, "I am more positive than you. I am outgazing you." Throwing as much positivity as possible into your gaze, the same being inspired, of course, by your feeling. Exercise 3. Say and feel, "You are afraid of me. I am making you feel my strength." Throwing the feeling into your gaze. Actual practice. After you have acquired the faculty of making your strength felt by the above exercises, you may use same upon other people when the occasion renders it advisable. If you are addressed by some person whom you think is trying to master you mentatively, or whose strong influence you wish to ward off, you may use the above method on him. As a rule, the person who is doing the talking has a slight advantage over the listener, all else being equal. The speaker is the more positive because he is expressing more energy, but you may counteract this, if you are the listener, by simply sending him a glance accompanied by the feeling of, "I scatter your force into bits, you cannot affect me." Points of practice. In resisting an attack of this sort, keep your mouth closed, with the teeth touching, for this bite denotes strength and firmness, and brings into play the parts of the brain manifesting these qualities, and thus charges your mentative currents with these feelings. At the same time, gaze firmly and steadily into the eyes of the other, using the fascinating gaze. I would bid you remember my remarks in Mental Magic about the person standing having the advantage of the one sitting. Avoid the sitting position when the other person is standing. Do not give him this advantage, but take it for yourself if you can. Mental commands and refusals. In speaking to persons and requesting them to do something, you should accompany the verbal request by a mental command. For instance, if you say, "You will do this for me, won't you?" This is the suggestive form of questioning, remember. You should accompany the question with the command, made mentally with the proper glance, "You will do this." If you are the person requested to do something that you do not wish to do, you should answer, "No, I do not care to do this," or "I do not see my way clear to do it," or "I am unable to oblige you," etc., etc. But at the same time, you must send the mental answer with its accompanying glance. "I will not do it, and you cannot make me." Certain dangerous teaching. A well-known teacher along these lines several years ago taught his pupils to gaze into the eyes of persons whom they wished to affect, at the same time saying mentally, "I am looking at you. I am looking through your eyes into your brain. My willpower is stronger than yours. You are under my control. I will compel you to do what I wish. You must do what I say. You shall do this. Do it at once." It will readily be seen that this will generate a powerful mentative current if there is a sufficiently strong feeling, will, and desire behind it. But right here I shall give you an antidote for this kind of influence. In all cases where you are attacked mentally in this way, you may dissolve the force by a positive denial. The positive denial. The positive denial is the powerful force that scatters into tiny bits the force directed against one. It is a destructive agent, just as is the positive statement a constructive or creative one. One who understands the scientific use of this destructive force may undo the mentative work of others to a surprising degree. Someday I shall have more to say regarding these two warring forces, along the broader lines of the entire subject of telementation, but at present I shall confine myself to their use in personal influence. By a strong, positive denial, you may scatter and disintegrate any mentative influence directed against you. This formula will give you a general idea of it. Suppose that you are repelling a statement such as given above. In that case, you should say mentally, accompanying it with the proper glance, with feeling back of it: I deny positively your power over me. I deny it out of existence. I will not do your bidding, and I deny your right and power to command me. I deny your power, and I affirm my own. How to cultivate this power? You may cultivate this power to use the positive denial by practicing on an imaginary person whom you may suppose is trying to influence you. Imagine the strong, positive person before you, trying to influence you, and then start in to practice the positive denial on him, until you feel that you have beaten him off and have sent him flying away in retreat. These imaginary mental battles will develop a great power of mentative resistance in you, and I advise you to strengthen yourself along these lines. If you feel that you are weak, you may improve on the above exercise by imagining that after your enemy is in full retreat, you follow him up and pour statement after statement into him, changing your position from a defender into an attacking force. The secret of effective speaking. In personal conversation with another, you will find it of the greatest value to see as clearly as possible a mental picture, chart or map of what you are saying to him. By so doing, you will impress most forcibly upon his mind that which you wish him to see and feel. In this statement is compressed the secret of effective speaking. In the degree that you see and feel the thought that you are expressing in words will be the degree of impression made upon and mentative induction produced in the other person. The secret, of course, lies in the law of visualization as explained in Mental Magic and in this book. Psychological experiments. You may find an evidence of your increasing mentative influence by trying the physiological experiment of willing people to move this way or that way by gazing intently at them. In this experiment, it is not necessary for you to gaze into their eyes. Gazing at their back, preferably at the upper part of the neck at the base of the brain, will answer. You may try willing persons to look around on the street or in public places, etc., or you may will that they turn to the right or left of you when approaching each other on the street. Or, in stores, you may will that a certain clerk from out of a number will step forward to wait upon you. These and many similar experiments have an interest to the majority of students and are accomplished with comparative ease after sufficient practice. The whole theory and practice consist of a steady gaze and the mental command and will that the person will act so and so, together with the earnest expectation that they will obey the command and the mental picture of their doing so. That is all there is to it. General advice. In the use of the eye as a mentative instrument, remember first, last, and all the time that desire and will are the phases of the mentative energy, and that in the degree that desire is kindled and will is exerted, so will be the power expressed by yourself and impressed upon others. Read Mental Magic over a number of times until you have fully grasped the underlying principles. Then reread the present book and commit its exercises and instructions to memory. Then practice frequently and perfect yourself in the methods pointed out until you render them second nature. You will be conscious of a gradual growth and development along the lines of mentative power and influence. The flame of electromagnetic power once lit will never die out. Tend the flame carefully, keep the wick trimmed clean, and fill the lamp with oil, and it will ever burn bright and emit heat and light and power. The magnetic touch. The last mentative instrument mentioned in a previous chapter is the touch. There was a time in my early stages of experimentation and psychological research when I laughed at the idea of the touch playing any real part in the work of mentative influence. Of course, I saw the effect of the touch in certain phases of psychological work, but I believed that it was all merely suggestion. But I soon learned that the touch was really a most potent instrument of mentative energy. I now explain it by the idea of the nerves being like the wires upon which the electric current travels. The brain is the dynamo, or converter of the energy, and while the latter travels in waves and currents without any wires, just as does the wave of the wireless telegraph, still, if there is a wire to be had, then it follows the lines of least resistance and takes the advantage of the nerve wire. Certain parts of the body have nerve cells very highly developed in them, and are in fact miniature brains. In the cases of some persons of sensitive and trained touch, there exist little clusters of nerve cells at the ends of the fingers that act like miniature brains. The lips are also highly developed in this respect, as the well-known phenomena of kissing evidences. The fingers and hand are excellent polar mediums for conveying the mentative energy that pours down over the nerves from the brain, and through which it passes to the other person. How to use the hands. The use of the touch of the hands as a channel for conveying mentative energy depends greatly upon the development of the hands by the individual. Those who understand this matter develop the conductivity of the hands by treating them as follows. Think of your hands as excellent conductors of mentative energy, and imagine that you can feel the energy pouring down the nerves of your arms and out your hands, obeying your will when you shake hands with people. You will soon develop your hands to such a degree that some sensitive persons will actually feel the current passing into them. Always accompany the passage of the current with the thought or feeling that you wish to induce in the other person, just as you do when you use the fascinating gaze. In fact, the gaze and the hand clasp should be used together, when possible, for by doing so you double the effect. The magnetic hand clasp. When you shake hands with a person, throw mind and feeling into it, and do not fall into the mechanical, lifeless method so common among people. Throw your feeling down to your hand, and at the same time make a mental command or statement appropriate to the case. For instance, grasp the person's hand with feeling and interest, saying mentally at the same time, "You like me." Then, when you draw your hand away, if possible, let your fingers slide over the palm of his hand in a caressing manner, allowing his first finger to pass between your thumb and forefinger, close up in the crotch of the thumb. Practice this well until you can perform it without thinking of it. That is, make it your natural way of shaking hands. You will find that this method of shaking hands will open up a new interest in people toward you, and in other ways you will discover its advantage. You will never know a fascinating person who did not have a good hand clasp. It is a part of the fascinating personality. Other uses of the hands. There are many persons well grounded on the psychological principles underlying mental fascination who use the hands as a medium for mentative energy without shaking hands. For instance, they sit near the other person and place their hands so that their fingers will point toward him, at the same time willing that the current flow through the fingers and toward the other. They also use their hands in conversation so as to have the tips of their fingers pointing toward the other. This last plan becomes highly effective when used with the appropriate gestures, for it is akin to the mesmeric pass of the hands. In this connection, I would say beware of the person who is always trying to put his hands on you. Beware of the pawing over process. Avoid it in the ordinary way if possible, or else deliberately practice the positive denial toward the person, holding the idea and mental statement that, I deny the power of your magnetism, I scatter it by my denial. A warning to women. In concluding this chapter, I would especially caution young women, and older ones for that matter, against allowing men to be familiar with them in the direction of holding hands, or similar practices. Not only does this familiarity breed contempt, but there are good psychological reasons why the practice is to be condemned. You have seen what part the hands play in magnetizing, as it is called, and is it not clearly discernible how one may use the hands in this petting and all that sort of thing in order to psychologically affect another person? I am not speaking now of the caresses indulged in by honorable true lovers, for all the talk in the world would not change that sort of thing. But I am alluding to the indiscriminate pawing over on the part of strange men that some young girls allow. There is a danger in this sort of thing, and I want you to know it. If you have daughters or young female relatives, warn them against this thing and tell them the reasons why. A caution to men. And the same thing is true of the man who is always patting other men on the shoulder or resting his arm around them or else taking hold of them in a friendly, caressing way during a conversation. Such men may not know the psychology of the thing, but they have found out that this sort of patting up makes other men more impressionable and amenable to their influence, and so they practice it. Make them stop it, either by moving away or by positive denial. The protective armor. Now, once more, remember the power of this positive denial as a disperser and disintegrator of adverse influence. If this book taught you nothing else, it would still be worthwhile to you because of this one point of instruction. For this positive denial is a mentative armor that will protect you, a mentative sword that will defend you, a mentative lightning flash that will clear the mental atmosphere. Learn the secret of positive statement and positive denial, and you are clad in an invulnerable armor and armed with the weapon of strength. And so you may, like the warrior bold, go gaily to the fray. May the victory be yours. End of Chapter 20. Use of Mentative Instruments. Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson. Concluding instruction. We have now reached the end of our consideration of the subject of mental fascination in this book. But you have reached only the beginning of the subject. When you close these pages, for the real subject rests in the action of the principles in real life. The effect of the instruction. Though you may not feel disposed to put into operation much of the instruction given herein, yet from your very acquaintance with what has been taught in these pages, you will be compelled to see the operation of the principles in the everyday life around you. You will see them in operation on every side, now that you are familiar with their laws of operation. And you will find yourself instinctively guarding against its influence just as you would guard against a threatened physical blow, and you will be surprised, and perhaps pained sometimes, at seeing people trying to influence you in this way, whom you would not have suspected of doing so. On the whole, you will be a much stronger man or woman by reason of the information herein given you. And you will have the advantage of knowing how to resist, defeat, and dispel the adverse influences that may be used to influence you. Remember the assertion of the positive will and the use of the positive denial. Additional information. There is one thing more that I wish to call your attention to before closing. Although strictly speaking, it forms part of the subject of telemental influence rather than that of mental fascination. I have mentioned this matter in my work on mental magic. In my lesson on the science of telementation, I allude to the use of telementation for the purpose of mental fascination, which is performed by some persons who have become acquainted with the subject. distant fascination. The person wishing to influence another at a distance, just as he would in the case of personal interview, forms a mental image of the person whom he wishes to influence, and then proceeds just as if the person was actually before him, according to the methods mentioned in this book. I know of at least one teacher who advises his students to treat prospective customers and others with whom they expect to have dealings or relations as follows. Imagine your prospective customer or other person as seated in a chair before you which you are standing. Make the imagined picture as strong as possible, for upon this depends your success. Then proceed to treat the person just as you would if he were actually present. Concentrate your will upon him and tell him just what you expect to tell him when you meet him. Use all of the arguments that you can think of, and at the same time hold the thought that he must do as you say. Try to imagine him as complying with your wishes in every respect, for this imagining will tend to come true when you really meet the person. This rule may be used not only in the case of prospective customers, but also in the cases of persons whom you wish to influence in any way whatsoever. How to counteract the influence. Now all this is very plain to the student of this book and of my work on mental magic, for the principles employed are familiar to my students. The result of a practice like the above would undoubtedly tend to clear a mentative path in the other person's mind and make easier the effect of a subsequent interview. For the other person would be thus accustomed to the idea, thought, or feeling, and the work of clearing away the mental underbrush would be done in advance. But fortunately for us all, we have the antidote for this bane, if we have acquainted ourselves with the underlying principles of the subject. So important do I regard this matter of self-protection against this telemental influencing that I propose adding to my remarks on the subject several paragraphs from my book on mental magic, which, although you have already read them, should appear right in this place in order to be impressed upon your mind in connection with what I have just said. I want you all to read again what I have said on this subject of self-protection, so here is the reproduction of a few rules to use on occasions when you think that someone is trying to treat or influence you. Better study them carefully. Here they are. Valuable rules. 1. In the first place, steady your mind and calm your feelings. Then pause for a moment and say the words, "I am," calmly and forcibly, at the same time forming a mental picture of yourself as a center of force and power in the great ocean of mind. See yourself as standing alone and full of power. Then mentally form a picture of your aura, extending about a yard on all sides of you in an egg-shaped form. See that this aura is charged with your willpower, which is flowing outward, repelling any adverse mental suggestions that are being sent to you and causing them to fly back to the source from whence they came. A little practice will enable you to perfect this picture, which will greatly aid you in creating a strong positive aura of will, which will prove to be a magnetic armor and shield. It has helped many. I assert my individuality as a center of force, power, and being. Nothing can adversely affect me. My mind is mine own, and I refuse admittance to unwelcome suggestions for influences. My desires are my own, and refuse to admit undesirable variations by induction or otherwise. My will is my own, and I charge it with power to beat off and repel all undesirable influences. I am surrounded by an aura of positive will, which protects me absolutely. A useful denial. The following denial has proved of the greatest value to many. I deny to all or any the power to influence me against my best interest. I am my own master. These words may seem simple, but if you will use them, you will be surprised at their efficacy. You realize, of course, that it is the mental state aroused by the words that does the work, rather than any special virtue in the words themselves. Guard against impulses. 2. Guard yourself from acting upon impulses. When you feel a sudden or unaccountable impulse to do this thing or that thing, stop and assert your positive individuality, and then drive out all outside influences by repeating the affirmations, etc., given above, and by creating the proper mental picture. Then, when you have recovered your balance, consider the impulse and decide whether it is to your best interests or otherwise. You will be able to see this clearly by reason of your mental house cleaning a moment before. Then, if the impulse seems to be against your best interests, drive it from you, saying, "I drive you away from me. You do not belong to me. Return to those who sent you," or other words to that effect. This may be rendered more forceful if you will but create a mental picture of the discarded idea flying away from you in the shape of a tiny thought wave. These mental pictures aid one very materially in such matters, both in the sending forth of an idea as well as in the discarding of one. The positive aura. 3. Cultivate the picture and idea of a positive aura, and always think of yourself as being encased in such a one. See yourself as a strong, positive I, a center of power encased in an impregnable sheath of auric force. You will thus be able to build up yourself into a mighty center. You will be surprised at the confused manner of people who try to influence you, when they come in contact with this aura and find their suggestions and mentative currents being cast back upon themselves. Such people find themselves all broken up when they meet a condition like this, which they do not understand, for a very few of them are practical occultists. The mental picture of yourself as a center of power surrounded with a positive aura will, if persisted in, render you extremely positive, so that your influence is sure to be felt by the world with which you come in contact. Amusing sequels. You will often be amused by occurrences following after the rejection of these stray impulses, etc. You will find that if you have had an impulse to buy a certain thing or sell a certain thing at a sacrifice, that in a day or so, perhaps an hour or so, you will be approached by some person who will advise you personally to do that same thing, the person being likely to be benefited by the scheme or plan. I do not mean that such person has necessarily tried to influence you by mentative currents, for he may not have consciously done so, but nevertheless, that is just what has happened, and his desire or will has caused these currents to flow in your direction, and you have felt them. Now that your eyes have been opened to this fact, you will be amused and surprised to see how many corroborative proofs you will receive. But always insert your individuality as a center of power, and all will be well with you in these matters. The protective agent. I hope that the above reproduction of the advice given in Mental Magic will do you good, and once more remember the power of the positive denial as a protective agent. By its use you may disperse and scatter the mentative currents of others and surround yourself with an impregnable armor of mentative energy. And also remember this, which I have not said elsewhere, that the law of life is concerned with the protection of the individual, and gives to each the weapons with which to preserve his individuality. So true is this that occultists know that there is the greatest difference in the use of the mentative power as an attacking force and as a protective force. I will illustrate this briefly. Protective individuality. A man's mentative force is immensely more powerful when he uses it to protect his individuality than when he uses it to attack the individuality of another. In fact, if everyone understood the laws of mentative defense and would avail himself of the information given by me under this head, there would be almost a total absence of mentative attack, for the futility of the same would soon be recognized. The only reason that the strong individuals are able to affect the weaker ones so frequently is because the other do not know their inner power and make no defense. In fact, the majority of people do not know of these laws at all, and if one tells them, they sneer and smile knowingly, tapping their foreheads to indicate that their informant is just a little off. Poor sheep and geese! They are so happy in their ignorance and conceit that it almost seems a pity to disturb them. Nature's protective armor. But to return to my subject, you will find that it will require a much less effort of will to protect your individuality than it will to attack the individuality of another. You will find that the law is on your side when you say, "I won't be influenced. I deny the power of another to weaken my individuality," for you have then called into operation that law of nature which is always in operation and which she gives to her creatures in the way of an instinctive protective force. So there is no occasion to be afraid. You are immune from attacks if you will but assert the force within you. The glory of individuality. And now, friends, in conclusion, I beg of you to remember that you are individuals, centers of mind, power, force, and energy, yes, centers of life in the great ocean of being. Each of you is something different from any other center, and the law wishes you to live your own life, develop your own individuality, assert your own birthright, and in the measure that you do so, so will the law be on your side. Do not let the snare of personal pride trip you up and entangle you in its meshes, for it is but an illusion. But glory in your pride of individuality, and do not be frightened, coaxed, seduced, lured, or driven by the race thought into the condition of the worm of the dust, person. Do not be a human doormat. Do not be a human sheep or goose, following some fool leader in a stately goose step, or the sheep-like follow my leader fashion. Remember that you are men and women, that you are individuals, for which the cosmic machinery has been laboring for ages in order to evolve. The statement of individuality. The statement of individuality that I am here now is a mighty one. It will always be I am with you. It will always be here with you. It will always be now with you. No matter what state your individuality may reach, no matter what point of space you may occupy, no matter what period of time it may be, it will always be true that I am here now. For it will always be your I that is speaking. It will always be am with you everywhere. Place will be here to you. All time will be now with you. May you unfold into a perception of this statement of individuality. For when you do, you will have reached a mental plane where even the principles herein taught will seem elementary to you, for you will have soared above them and their operation. May this and other works of mine be as ladders upon which you may mount, and which you may then kick away from under your feet as no longer needed. Students, I thank you, and bid you auf Wiedersehen. May the law protect you till we meet again. End of Chapter 21. Concluding Instruction.